Ladies and gentlemen, viewers across India, Mauritius, and around the world, welcome back to our channel. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most important and fascinating stories in global geopolitics and economics. India and Mauritius have agreed to begin trade in their own national currencies, instead of relying on the US dollar. This move may look like a small bilateral agreement, but in reality, signals a seismic shift in the way nations are approaching international trade, sovereignty, and financial independence. This is not just a story about India and Mauritius. This is a story about the weakening of dollar dominance, about India strengthening its place in the Indian Ocean, and about small nations like Mauritius finding greater security by aligning with rising powers like India. And most importantly, this is a story about the future of global economics, where multipolarity is replacing unipolarity. Now, let us unpack everything step by step. First, why is this agreement so significant? Traditionally, almost all international trade, whether between big countries like India and the United States, or smaller nations like Mauritius, is conducted in dollars. The dollar has been the global reserve currency for decades. But over the past few years, the cracks in this system have begun to show. Nations are increasingly realizing that dependence on the US dollar makes them vulnerable to external shocks, to sanctions, and to fluctuations in America's own economy. So when India and Mauritius sign a deal to directly settle their trade in rupees and Mauritian rupees, without the dollar acting as the middleman, they are saying something very bold to the world. We can conduct business without the dollar. We trust each other's financial systems enough to trade directly. Let's put this into perspective. Mauritius is a small island nation in the Indian Ocean, but it is strategically one of the most important partners for India. Why? Because of its location, its deep cultural ties with India. Nearly 70% of Mauritius' population is of Indian origin, and its proximity to the strategic Chagos Archipelago and Diego Garcia, one of the most important U.S. military bases. India has been steadily increasing its influence in Mauritius through infrastructure projects, security agreements, and economic support. Just this week, India pledged over $680 million in aid for Mauritius, covering infrastructure development, maritime security, and healthcare. So, this agreement to trade in national currencies is not an isolated event. It is part of a much larger strategic partnership. Now, let's talk numbers. Bilateral trade between India and Mauritius may not sound huge compared to India's trade with the US, China, or the EU, but it is extremely symbolic. Last year, trade between India and Mauritius crossed nearly $500 million. With India exporting refined petroleum, pharmaceuticals, and food products, while Mauritius exports seafood, textiles, and sugar. By moving away from the dollar, these two nations are cutting transaction costs, avoiding dollar volatility, and strengthening financial independence. And this is where the real significance comes in. India is not just doing this with Mauritius. Similar agreements have already been signed with Russia, Iran, and some Southeast Asian countries. The Reserve Bank of India has allowed more than 20 countries to settle trade directly in rupees. So Mauritius is part of a bigger trend, the trend of de-dollarization. Let us pause here and ask, why does India want this? The answer is very clear. For decades, India, like many other countries, has been paying in dollars for imports. This means India's foreign reserves must be stocked with dollars, often earned through exports or remittances. But this dependence limits India's economic sovereignty. If tomorrow the U.S. Federal Reserve changes interest rates, or Washington imposes restrictions, the ripple effects are immediately felt in India. By shifting trade to the rupee, India reduces that vulnerability. For Mauritius, the benefits are equally strong. It's a small economy. Mauritius faces dollar shortages, currency fluctuations, and global inflation pressures. Trading directly in rupees reduces risks, makes imports from India cheaper, and ensures smoother transactions for businesses. Now, let's look at the geopolitical angle. This move is not just about economics, it is about power, about influence, about who sets the rules of global trade in the 21st century. For decades, the United States and the West have set those rules. But today, countries like India, China, and Russia are creating alternative systems. China has already been promoting the use of the yuan in trade with countries in Africa and Asia. Russia, after facing Western sanctions, has been trading more in rubles and yuan, and now India is stepping up with the rupee. What does this mean for the world? It means that slowly but surely the dollar's dominance is eroding. It doesn't mean the dollar will collapse tomorrow, but it does mean that the world is entering a multipolar currency system. A system where trade is settled in many different currencies, where countries have more options, and where financial power is more evenly distributed. Think of it this way. Mauritius agreeing to trade in rupees may seem like a small headline, but it is part of a much larger book being written about the decline of dollar hegemony. But let us zoom back in to the India-Mauritius relationship. This agreement deepens trust between the two nations. It means that Mauritius recognizes India not just as a cultural partner, not just as a security partner, but as a financial partner. For India, it means projecting influence deeper into the Indian Ocean, securing sea lanes and building allies in a region where China has also been trying to expand. Because make no mistake, China is very active in the Indian Ocean. From building ports in Sri Lanka and Pakistan to increasing its naval presence, Beijing is seeking influence. By aligning Mauritius closer through trade and aid, India is sending a clear signal. The Indian Ocean is India's sphere of influence. Now, what does this mean for ordinary people? For Indian businesses, it means easier access to Mauritius's markets. For Mauritian companies, it means reduced costs when importing Indian goods. For students, travelers, and workers moving between the two countries, it means fewer currency hassles. But the larger benefit is psychological. It shows both nations that they have to depend on Washington or Brussels for everything. They can craft their own path. Of course, challenges remain. Currency volatility is real. The rupee itself has been under pressure against the dollar. Mauritius's rupee is a small, relatively illiquid currency. Managing exchange rates between two national currencies is not simple. It requires trust, financial infrastructure, and political will. But the fact that both governments have agreed to this means they are ready to take on those challenges. Now, let me paint a bigger picture for you. Imagine the Indian Ocean 5 years from now. India has similar rupee trade agreements not just with Mauritius, but with Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, and African nations like Kenya and Tanzania. Slowly, the rupee becomes the currency of choice for trade across the Indian Ocean. This boosts India's economy, strengthens its strategic clout, and builds a sphere of influence rivaling China's yuan-based networks. This is where the India-Mauritius agreement fits in. 'Tis a stepping stone, a signal, a precedent, shows what is possible. And it comes at a very interesting time. Remember, India is also negotiating free trade agreements with the European Union, with the United States, with the UK. India is positioning itself as a global hub of trade. And currency agreements like this make India a more attractive, more independent, more powerful player. So, when we talk about India and Mauritius trading in national currencies, we are not just talking about money. We are talking about sovereignty, about power, about the very structure of the global economy. Friends, viewers, let me conclude this part with a strong message. This agreement is not a small technical change. It is a statement. It's a statement that the global financial order is shifting, a statement that India is ready to lead, and a statement that even small nations like Mauritius can play a big role in shaping that future. So stay tuned, because this is just the beginning.